Okay.
I think we are going live on Facebook, and if somebody's on their Facebook page, any comments if it's not working in like the next 2 or 3 minutes? It says done.
Okay. And
All
I'm
right.
at your disposal. I'm at your disposal. So
Awesome.
when you're done with me, you're done with me.
All right, perfect. So, Paul, honestly, oh, hold on one second. We're going to record that. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul Vallas. I am so honored that you took the time to talk to us. And honestly, the parents who we have gotten on Reopen Illinois Schools Facebook page, we have been trying to collaborate and come together with ideas, and we don't know the system. We don't know how, this works. And so when I reached out to you last week, you were so kind enough to talk with me about this and give us some direction. So I know that our team, our group of people would love to hear what you have to say. I can do a little bio on you, or you can do it. I'd love for you to tell.
I've just been a superintendent for about 2 decades and a lifelong public servant, 4 teachers in the household and 6 at one time or another first responders. My son's a firefighter, Chicago firefighter. My other son is a San Antonio police officer. And my wife works at TSA, so they're all trying to infect me, so to speak. So we're doing social distancing in the home here, but no, lifelong public servant, and obviously 6 years in Chicago public schools. I also led the rebuilding effort in New Orleans after Katrina, and I've done work internationally, and having spent time in Haiti and having been hospitalized 3 times, I am well aware of the dangers of obviously, infectious diseases and things like that. So certainly not a wallflower when it comes to those type of things, and certainly not flippant in terms of thinking about how schools can reopen in a safe and secure manner. So anyway, that's a little bit about my background.
Okay. And what I'd say is I think you're just being a little modest, because when I was in my 20s and just, single person in the city, and I heard about you all the time on the news and just really followed you and admired you. And you did run for governor and mayor as well.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for making me feel really old.
I'm sorry, I didn't really want to say that, but I just wanted you to know that you've got a real following of people who think that you really are just a really good guy. So thank you for joining us. So what I just wanted to do is, I know you've been on our page on Reopen Illinois Schools, and I want you just to tell us a little bit about your assessment about what's going on, your ideas, your thoughts, kind of big picture, and then we'll kind of go down from there.
And let me point out that if your audience hooks up with me on LinkedIn, I've been posting things since March about reopening precautions, models, testing, you name it. I comment on it. That's what happens when you spend extensive time quarantined. You get up early in the morning, you think, what can I pontificate now? Now. Look, I mean, the challenge that we're facing in this country is that we weren't prepared for the pandemic, and there's been kind of a schizophrenic response to it. And of course, the absence of leadership at the federal level is obviously a big reason. I mean, when you have European countries getting 200 to 300 new infections a day, and we getting 50, 60, 70,000 new infections a day, clearly there's something missing here. And the problem is that it doesn't look like we may not even be through the first wave. So God knows when they're going to secure a vaccine. You don't know if the virus is going to mutate. There's just so many unknowns out there. At the end of the day, this kind of economic quarantine that we placed ourselves in, or just the resistance to reopen schools, I mean, that's going to continue to be very real. And as you know, the teachers unions across the nation have now, for the most part, been arguing against reopening and things like that. Some have crossed the line. In the case of LA Unified, they're actually demanding a closing of charters and a defunding of police before they return to the schools. Just not that schools be safe and secure. Fortunately for us, our unions have been a little more responsible. So the bottom line is, we don't know when this is going to end. And the problem in too many states, it's hard to say whether or not Illinois is going to go in the reverse direction and we're going to begin to spike again. People will continue to make a really, really strong case that we should remain quarantined and the economy should continue to be partially shut down and schools should not reopen. So the argument's going to be there and people can argue that point. I think the point that I want to make is we have to prepare for the eventuality that we may have to exist in an extended COVID type environment. So the question is, what can we do to make our schools as safe as possible? And I like to say, make the schools the safest place in the community. And then what can we also do to teach, to be able to provide quality instruction if schools are interrupted, or even if schools are reopened, and the need to minimize the number of students on site for a specific time, a combination or kind of a hybrid between instruction as well as remote instruction as well as on-site instruction. So let me talk about the things that and these are things that you should demand, because from a funding standpoint, Illinois schools are not going to be financially immediately impacted like other school districts in poor states. And we on the average in Illinois spend $2,000 more per pupil. Well, actually between 25% to 50% more per pupil than our surrounding states. Chicago actually spends $2,000 more per pupil than the state average. So it's not like this is a state that does not invest money in education. 25% of the state's budget goes to education, 50, 60, 70%, depending on where you live, your property taxes go to education. Plus the federal government is about to, what I call triple down on their original allocation of money to schools. You know, they gave schools in Illinois over $500 million, and they're about to pass another bill, and it's supposed to double the amount of money that was given to schools in the first wave. Now, obviously, if you're a high poverty school, you're going to benefit significantly. If you're a low poverty school, you're not going to benefit. It's not going to have a major impact. But the bottom line is this. You know, the schools are so heavily reliant on property taxes, the most stable revenue source, number one. Number two, the state has not cut funding for education this year. No, they've preserved, they decided to borrow from the Federal Reserve instead. And then number three, there is going to be additional federal money coming, and not all of it's going to be tied to reopening. So I think what we have to do is develop this mentality that we've got to create a health safety environment that is not only going to prepare us and enable us to reopen, if the virus continues to be omnipresent, so to speak, but we simultaneously need to create the type of superior remote learning instruction that is live, that has children connecting with a teacher, that has parents connecting with that teacher for guidance and for support. So at the end of the day, we should view these two things just not as something we're building to deal with COVID, but something that we're going to be building that we can take advantage of over the long term. So let me talk about reopening the schools. This is what you should demand. Number one, you have to do screening, and you can screen with the handheld devices, or you can secure these facial recognition kiosks that they're almost like metal detectors. You walk by and instantly they tell you whether or not you have an elevated temperature. So the technology is there to do screening and to do quickly and to do it so that there's a minimum amount of contact between the screener and the person being screened. Number one. Number two, there has to be specific quarantine procedures. And if you give parents a device to screen their kids at home, the screening begins at home. So parents are sending their kids to school if indeed their temperature's up or if they have symptoms. And then of course you need to be able to screen students who have the virus, and you need to be able to screen students who once they're in school, or for that matter staff, you need to quarantine them if they exhibit symptoms. So you need to have quarantine protocols. The third thing you need to do is obviously you need masks, but you can go beyond the masks. You need to secure masks, or you can secure these plastic full facial visors, which are much more comfortable than masks and not much more. And in terms of they're reusable like masks can be, but even more convenient. And they don't obstruct the breathing and things like that. So making sure that everybody is masked or has a visor, a full facial visor. You can also go beyond that, particularly for schools that have limited capacity to do the type of social distancing that is needed. You can purchase these plexiglass partitions. So each of the classroom seats can be in a plexiglass partition. You can have the partitions blocking the teacher's desk. You go to drugstores, you go to the local gas station, they have those plastic partitions. So there's no reason why you can't install them throughout the school so that you have that protection. Obviously, you need to do social distancing, but the partitions help you deal with challenges. If you're facility challenged and you can't perhaps social distance like perhaps other schools can do that have bigger campuses or smaller student bodies. Clearly, you have to adopt the social distancing rules, and it's the 60-50 rule. It's 6 feet apart. It's no more than 50 people gathering at a enclosed location. At the end of the day, you just have to build your course schedule. You have to build your classroom schedule, your classroom arrangements around that 60-50, that social distancing approach. And obviously, for younger grades, I mean, you need to be moving the teachers from classroom to classroom as opposed to moving the kids from classroom to classroom. So there are things that you can do. And you need to sanitize, but you need to go beyond sanitation. There are now these UV devices that are now safe and that really destroy most of the pathogens in a room. And you can install these UV devices in classrooms if you have the financial means. And you can actually keep them on while the kids are in class. I don't advise that. I don't trust the science, so to speak. But there's no reason why you can't have them on in the morning before the school starts, in the afternoon, et cetera, when the classroom's vacant. And you can also install them near the air ventilation system, so they're killing all the pathogens in the air. You can install them in the gym, in the locker room, in the bathrooms, and so it's just another cleanly. It's another way to and this is what they're doing in hospitals. This is what they install in hospitals, what a lot of universities are purchasing. And you can also use foggers that can also be used to clean the gyms, to clean the bathrooms, et cetera. Now that's another approach that can be used. So all these things in combination can significantly reduce the risks. And there's no reason why you can't do all those things. Now, let me talk to you about just the cost implications. I've been looking at a lot of products and vendors out there, and you can mask or screen, you can do the temperature checking kiosks. You can purchase the partitions to separate the classroom's teacher from the class, the children from one another. A school with 500 kids and faculty, combination of 500 students and faculty, the cost of doing something like that would be between $25,000 and $30,000. A school district of 500 kids generally has a budget of about $7 million. So these are not cost prohibitive. And there's competition out there on the market, bulk purchasing and things like that. So there's no reason why you can't develop the type of comprehensive health safety plan that will minimize the risks. And if you're a school district that serves a poor community, that school could be a much safer place than keeping the kids at home without parents at home and congregating in the community. The poorer the families, the less likelihood they're not going to have somebody at home monitoring them, maybe an older sibling, and they're not going to be social distancing. They're not going to be walking around with masks and things like that. So at the end of the day, you can do this. Let me point out, if you do it, you've actually created an infrastructure that will help you in the post-pandemic world. I mean, they can help you, particularly the cleanliness and the UV, help you kill the flu viruses. It can help create a much healthier, safer environment for the kids in normal times. So that's something from a health safety standpoint that the school should demand of their even if you don't use the plexiglass, you have the plexiglass there. You have all these instruments that can contribute to a safer and more healthier school.
So that's awesome, Paul. I love that. And my comment is that sounds pretty simple. It sounds pretty, I'm going to say easy. I mean, you have to implement it, but we're still in a battle. And it seems like, to be a little delicate, it sort of is between the teachers unions and the parents right now of if we do all these things, because I do think parents want everyone to be safe, but so you implement that. There still seems to be a pushback. And so that's where I feel like there's almost not much we can do as parents to leverage, ourselves, I guess. It's so what do you see about that? How do we move forward from there?
Well, what's really important is that the parents it's that the parents mobilize and the parents organize, and you can't let the union leadership play a divide and conquer game. Because what they try to do is they try to, they try to form an alliance with the parents, and sometimes use the parents against the superintendent and things like that. And at the end of the day, look, do not underestimate the severe damage and the long-term damage that's being done because of the closing of schools. And look, it's impacting affluent families, just not the poor families, but it's going to have a devastating impact on the poor families. And even if you're in a district that does not have a large number of Title I children and things like that, that devastating impact is going to impact education funding across the country. Because, for example, Black and brown children, the overwhelming vast majority are in poor, racially isolated schools, number one. Number two, the children start off on the average about 20 points behind the average. So they're behind in the first place, and they're going to be devastated by this replacement of on-site educational services with remote learning educational services. I mean, the last semester, for the most part, the remote learning experience was abysmal, absolutely abysmal. In Chicago Public Schools, for example, 40% of the kids barely went online 2 days a week. And we weren't talking about online 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. And there was very little facial instruction, what's it called? Synchronous. Synchronous instruction, or I call it, easier for me to pronounce, live instruction.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was very little of that. In Boston, they refer to the phenomena of digital dropouts, where now you don't have high school kids dropping out. Now you have young children simply not tuning in. So ineffectively, at least for the good part of the semester, dropping out. So at the end of the day, remote learning is not going to be a substitute for quality on-site instruction. So there has got to, at some points, the school campuses are going to have to reopen. And if there's concerns on the teacher stand, what Denver is doing is Denver is taking the teachers that don't want to teach in the classroom because they're over 50 or they have pre-existing conditions and things like that. And they're focusing exclusively on providing online instruction, where the younger teachers are going to be the classroom teachers. You know, you just have to weigh who's willing to go in and who's not. You know, let me point out that every single day in America, 18.4 million first responders and essential workers go to work every single day. My firefighter son goes to work every single day. My police officer son goes to work every single day at the end of the day. And these healthcare workers are immersed in the virus and they go to work every single day. So I'm not criticizing teachers. It's important to be safe and secure, but people have got to sit down and realize that we've got to get schools open. So how can we open them safely, and how can we do our best to accommodate the teachers? Clearly, I've articulated, I think, what are the basic things you can do to significantly reduce the risks of the virus. And just as they want to give schools the choice, or some school districts want to give parents the choice of allowing their kids to do remote or come in person, that may have to be the arrangement you have with the teachers. If teachers feel that they are at risk, they'll have the option to teach from a distance. But at the end of the day, schools can't stay closed forever, and we just don't know how prolonged this crisis is going to be. Now, I want to say a few things about remote, but let me stop right there and just take any questions that you might any other questions.
If anybody else has questions, put them in the chat box. But so what I'm hearing from you is that the first thing the parents really need to say is demand of the schools that they're safe, because it's almost like a non-starter when parents are trying to talk to the teachers and the teachers are saying, well, it's not safe, it's not safe. Well, I mean, the reality is that, you know, it can and cannot be, but until the school has said it's safe, the teachers aren't going to want to go back, correct? So that's like the first step for parents.
You have to have redundant systems to secure safety. Like for me, if I were a superintendent, you know, I would have the handheld, thermal testers, temperature testers for every parent. I would give them a handheld for every parent. You know, the federal government is providing funding for their, Trump administration wants schools to reopen. They're going to be allocating money so that schools can reopen. I'm not siding with Trump by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just pointing out that there is going to be more money available. So I would have every parents with testing temperatures at home. I would have the ability to test people expeditiously at school. I would have everybody with a mask or a shield, and they could decide what they wanted to use. I would have every classroom, if I had to, enclosed in plastic, like they're doing like they're doing in a lot of European schools and in Asian schools. I would have that plexiglass separating the teacher from the classroom. I would not only have sanitation protocols, but I would have the UV devices that, if I could afford it in every classroom, zapping the classroom before the class began, not while the students were in, although they're not supposed to be posing a risk. At the end of the day, it's, you have to exercise precaution. And I would have the foggers to go in and to clean out the bathrooms and to clean out the gyms and things like that, or places where, so I would take every single precaution, and I would find a way to establish a schedule or to distance people, even to the point where I would try to identify other buildings in the community that could hold classes separately, for example, so that you could space out the population even more, so you could get schools open and get kids back into school. Because look, imagine the devastation it's going to have on working families. There is a direct correlation between our ability to work remotely and to learn remotely and our income, whether we like it or not, although we are all being hurt. Even some of the most sophisticated, affluent families struggle with remote instruction. My wife and I were talking about the other day what a struggle we would have if we struggled enough helping them with their homework, let alone teaching them remotely and getting their attention. Now we can appreciate the job that our job that teachers have, but only 15 to 18% of Blacks and Latinos can actually work remotely. So what are they going to do?
No, I'm really asking, what is really going to happen to those children?
Yeah, well, what's going to happen, first of all, is they're going to be in a household that becomes increasingly depressed, because either the children are going to be left alone or left in the care of an older sibling, or the parent's not going to be able to work. Economic tensions and economic deprivation can lead to so many other things. You know what I mean? How many of these kids the home environment could clearly become an unhealthy one. If the parents are depressed and the parents aren't working and there's not enough income coming in to support the family, and the kids are literally incarcerated in their homes for extended periods of time, it's just not a healthy situation. So clearly, it's not only going to impact children, but it's going to impact the families of children, the families of all children, particularly working families and the working poor. So the impact's going to be pretty devastating.
You know what, Paul, you had talked about in one of your other videos about when you were helping out with the rebuilding of Katrina and how far behind those kids were. And I noticed, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I didn't, where I went to Haiti like a month after the earthquake, and clearly saw the devastation. The 2010 Haitian earthquake killed anywhere from 175 to 300,000 people. They've never been able to count in like 7 minutes, because in Port-au-Prince, the entire capital collapsed. I didn't go to New Orleans until well over a year after Katrina, because they just couldn't get schools reopened. And we had kids returning to school that had been out of school for close to a year. And they weren't 1 year behind, they were 3 or 4 years behind. And those kids were on the margins anyway. Those kids who were, it was going to be a struggle to keep them in school. They were gone. And despite our attempts to open up what we call schools or special programs for overage, underachieving kids, the kids, we had this phenomena of 17-year-old freshmen. The bottom line is students were returning to school, or those who were returning to school were way behind. And there's a large number, thousands of kids simply dropped out at all. Dropped out completely. So you can just imagine the devastating impact that this is going to be, particularly on the poorest children. Which brings me to something parents should also demand. If the teachers are saying we don't want to open, we want to open remotely. The question is, if the virus continues to linger, if you don't see a reduction in the number of new people getting affected, do the teachers or the teacher unions then force you not to reopen at all? And do we spend the entire year teaching remotely? Well, I think remote learning, we're going to evolve, and we're probably going to get better at it, but we're years away from remote learning being a substitute, being even a reasonable substitute school-based learning, particularly for younger kids. But I would say that if one of the things that you should demand is if we're going remotely, then the rules are off, because these collective bargaining agreements were written for a non-COVID world. They're almost irrelevant right now. So if I were running a large urban district, what I would say is there is no more, and we're going to have a school year that is heavily dependent on remote instruction. Then there is no summer off. We're going to have to make up the learning time. Then kids are going to learn year round. If we got remote learning, they're going to learn year round, because there's nothing that improves student achievement more than instructional time on task. And American schools are notorious for not providing the instructional minutes that are provided by schools abroad. There's people on the blogs who will criticize, claiming, oh, they chartered school, 100% school choice in New Orleans, and they'll put out a lot of misinformation on schools. Today, for 7 consecutive years, the rebuilt New Orleans school system led the state in academic improvement, dramatic improvement in a system that was 90% Black and 90%, almost 90% poverty. Why was that? Because of my genius? No. All the schools were independent, autonomous schools. The local schools serving the community, parents had choice to pick. The parents could pick the school of their choice. And incidentally, we had all the special education kids because none of the schools were magnet schools. The reason those schools improved was because our school calendar provided 35% more instruction than was mandated by the state. So we didn't have 10 weeks off in the summer. We gave the teachers Mardi Gras week and Jazz Fest week and the holidays, but kids were in school most of the summer. It was a continual learning experience. So if people are going to go remotely, and so far remote instruction has meant much more limited instruction, much more limited instructional time on task, then you really need to develop a remote learning instructional calendar that carries instruction through the summer so that there's no interruption. Because not only do you have to provide quality instruction, you're going to have to play catch up. So the unions are going to have to be willing to do that. That's number one. Number two, you've got to be open to outsourcing some of your remote learning, particularly at the high school level. There are some superior education providers out there that have an expertise in remote learning. And I'm not going to recommend any. People can explore them on their own and research them on their own. But this may be a case where you can supplement your remote learning experience by contracting out with educational providers who have expertise. And I'm not talking about K-12 or whatever. And so I'm not recommending anybody, but that's an approach to take too. Because then your teachers who are not familiar with remote learning or don't have the adequate competency level can then monitor those courses. Then they can provide tutoring assistance and things like that. And the third thing is if you're going to restructure the high schools, and even Moskovitz, who runs one of the most successful charter school clusters in New York, extraordinarily successful, said, we're opening, but we're going to focus on the core areas. Well, if I were in the high schools, I've always felt that there is so much wasted time in high schools with students taking courses that are not relevant or students taking irrelevant electives. And we can't indulge ourselves anymore. A lot of these extracurricular electives lend themselves to online instruction. Do you need a full-time teacher to teach electives that are not going to be offered during the world of COVID, so to speak? So why can't students take their core courses and you focus heavily on the core courses? And then particularly for the juniors and seniors, why can't we enroll them in work-study programs? Why can't we ask all the businesses in town and the state agencies and the local agencies, municipal agencies, police department, fire department, law firms, whatever, to create internships so the students can be in school or online with core curriculum, live instruction, 4 to 5 hours a day, and then they can be in a work-study program that puts some money in their pocket and gets them in a healthy working environment, exposed by the best role models in the community, working men and women. So those are things that you have to be willing to do and you have to be willing to demand. And those are things that the union leadership has to be willing to accommodate because the rules don't apply anymore. These contracts were negotiated for the non-COVID world. There's going to have to be adjustments. And obviously that's going to be your challenge.
So what I really heard clearly from you, and I think that our listeners probably picked it up as well, is that all bets are off the table right now with the collective bargaining agreements, and that we need to demand that those are redone and readjusted based on this new world of living, because this isn't the last time this is going to happen. And I think people are going to be more concerned about the flu as well, going, now that we're very aware of that. But so that really means that.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily compensation as much as it's responsibilities, staffing. I mean, if people are going to work from home and not want to work in school, then maybe their roles become redefined. Maybe they focus heavily on the remote learning aspect, or maybe they play this tutorial role. Because the hiring maybe you don't fill all those teacher vacancies, all those vacancies, unless those vacancies that you're filling are to provide instruction in the core courses. And maybe you hire more tutors, or maybe you outsource some of the course offerings, because the outsourcing, or there's an education company out there that can deliver that course or those courses more effectively. That's something that you've got to be willing. That's something that you've got to demand. It's your property taxes, and it's your kids. It's your property tax. You're paying for it, and it's your kids that are going to be impacted by it.
So how do we demand that? I mean, we don't get responses. Nobody's. I mean, the board, school board is. It's like we are not important to. I mean, the administrators, I feel, have listened. I feel like the principals, but the school board, I'm not getting that community interaction. I mean, is this just where you say, okay, then we just vote them out and vote somebody in who's going to communicate with us? Okay.
Well, look, the unions have been notorious about going in and focusing on these school board elections where 7, 8, 10% of the people vote, and getting control of those school boards, and then basically, having the school boards support their agenda. And look, I've negotiated 4 major collective bargaining agreements. I've raised teacher salaries 38% in my lifetime. I've never had to close a single school. I built over 100 schools. 90% of schools have been built to serve the poorest children in the community. So I'm not in any way, I support the collective bargaining. I've had very good working relationships with the unions, but it's all bets are off. It's a different environment right now. And I think what you've got to do is, first of all, support if you believe your superintendent is laying out a strategy that captures some of the things that I've talked about. I mean, his goal is to do redundant. When you're on that space shuttle, there's so many redundant components, the redundant training, redundant technology, etc. Well, if you've got a superintendent that's articulated a vision, a clear vision for making the schools as safe as possible, and if he's willing to push the envelope and to demand the type of cooperation in building a remote learning system where you have extended school year, where you have continuous remote learning, where you have live instruction, where you have not only the students having an instructor, but also having access to a tutor, because you're jettisoning non-essential positions so you can spend the money to hire that additional support to provide more one-on-one instruction. A tutor can sometimes work with 5 different groups of 5 different kids in the course of a week. You work with a superintendent to weigh in and to develop such a plan, and then you support that superintendent at your board meeting. Then you raise holy hell if you have to make sure that your agenda is being represented, and you don't allow people to try to co-opt you in the process. Because at the end of the day, I mean, this is ridiculous. In Chicago, they want to defund the police department, and they want to take school security out of the schools. There have been 224 school shootings in the last 10 years, 3 times the number of school shootings in the previous 10 years. I've been superintendent for 19 years. I had school police in all of my high schools. I never had a single school shooting. Yet in Philadelphia, in Chicago, I raised money to pay for the funerals of over 100 students who had been killed in their own communities. But yet, I mean, there's so much going on that we're going to spend our time protesting, demanding the defunding the teachers union demanding to the funding of the police. All I know is the police are going to work every day in a COVID environment. They're taking risks every day in a COVID.
Right.
My son, firefighter, had COVID. He recovered, thank God. So at the end of the day, we need to focus on, we need to be doing everything we can to develop a plan that can open our schools with the type of health safety infrastructure that will minimize the risk of infection and will allow the kids to return to school safely. And we need to develop a realistic, substantive remote learning program that's simply not going to be parents downloading things and then sending stuff back to the teacher and waiting 24 hours to get a response. So those are things that you should demand, because God knows you're paying for it.
Right. Okay. We have a couple questions.
Okay.
Our schools said they are not mitigation experts. Do you feel this is more about potential lawsuits?
Well, you know, this is look, I think the only people who are not going to suffer in this environment are the lawyers, whether they're suing cops or whether they're suing school districts. Yeah, I mean, that is an issue. It's incumbent upon the state, though, to minimize the risk. You know, it's important that you talk to, if schools are going to be reopened, I mean, we need to see the state exert the same efforts that they exert on so many other relevant things to basically protect the schools from litigation, because the state's laid out guidelines to reopen. And if the schools do reopen according to those guidelines, the state needs to make sure that those schools can be protected. You know, and again, that's a very valid question. I don't have a quick answer to that. I mean, we live in a litigious society where, trust me, people will find, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if people sued us for not reopening schools. You know, downstate, there's a family that's suing the school district because they're mandating that people wear masks. So it's crazy. So I don't have an easy answer.
Okay. So how can you teach art, woodworking, welding, drama, etc. remotely?
Yeah, well, you can't, and you're not going to be able to. You know, there's going to be some limit. Although, do not underestimate the ability to do occupational training online, like coding, for example. That can be taught online. There's a lot. There are a lot of occupational training areas that lend themselves to remote learning. Now, let me point out, I'm not saying that your college bound or your hope for a college bound student should become a welder, but there's no reason why they can't go through high school, number one, and developing, preparing to go to college while at the same time, getting certificated in coding, and at the same time, perhaps spending a semester or a second semester in an afternoon work study program and things like that. So there's no reason why you can't do that. So there are certainly going to be a number of electives and a number of offerings that are going to dwindle. The question is, what do you replace them with? What type of offerings, extracurricular offerings, lend themselves to remote learning? And I would submit to you that a lot of those technical areas like coding and graphic design, et cetera, are areas that can benefit your child over the long term. And obviously, there's nothing more beneficial than work study. I mean, my dad was an accountant before he got into the restaurant business. You know, come from a Greek family. We have to have a restaurant in our family. You know what I mean? So the restaurant gene kicked in one year, and then we got into the restaurant business. But when he was an accountant, he always got me and my brothers work. We always worked. I mean, I've had an afternoon job since I was in 8th grade. I mean, that can have, and I learned so much. I was a stutterer and stammerer, but because I worked in a restaurant where I had to interact with people, the speech therapist didn't help me overcome my stutter. The interacting with people did. So that work experience, that work study experience, whether you're college bound or whether you have no intention of going to college, is of extraordinary value, because it teaches you discipline and helps improve your communication skill. And it puts you in a safe, secure environment where you're surrounded by working men and women who are the best role models.
So Paul, let me ask you, we've been talking about that we think the teachers should, a lot of people have said this, the teachers should be teaching in the school. while the kids are remote, it's going to allow them the opportunity to get used to things. And so that when it's a transition back, it's kind of a transition into the hybrid. How do you feel about the teachers teaching at school?
Well, and we talked to this. We talked about. You asked me that question yesterday. Look, teachers are going to have to make adjustments. In the ideal world, the teachers union will agree to changing teachers' responsibilities, maybe reprogram, maybe cannibalizing courses that can't be taught remotely, and perhaps outsourcing to other education providers, or allowing juniors and seniors to spend a good part of the day in work study and things like that. Teachers and teacher unions are going to have to adjust to the fact that in the post-COVID world, the Farmer's Almanac is no longer the calendar that we can follow, that when we have our school year and our school day, that there's going to have to be continuous instruction. Maybe we have longer breaks during the course of the year so that there's no extended break of instruction. I mean, in a normal summer, students will lose 20% of their knowledge. Imagine how much knowledge they're losing, that they incurred the previous year. Imagine the knowledge loss of kids who are going to be out of school 6-7 months a year or more. So we're going to be making we're going to be demanding a number of really important things from teachers. I think we in turn have to be accommodating, and allowing a teacher, particularly if you're teaching remotely, to teach from home, because that teacher has to take care of her children. I'm comfortable with that. Why bring them into the classroom if they're ineffective? What's more important is, are they providing quality remote learning, live instruction? Your administrators need to be monitoring that live instruction, forcing them to come into the school when they have kids at home, when the school has already decided to teach remotely. As long as they're providing quality instruction, I don't care where it's being provided from, just as long as it has the characteristics that quality remote learning need to have for the kids to advance. So I would support them working at home because they have their own children to take care of.
So how do you then go from e-learning to a hybrid? Does it even seem realistic that there's going to be a hybrid if you've started with e-learning? It seems like I feel like the schools that are working in a hybrid mode at least are starting to protect the teachers and doing the things that you've talked about. With the teachers at home, how do you see that working? How do you see them transitioning from home just to in school then?
Well, I'm a little confused by the question in that I'm assuming that your school is going to open as a hybrid. So they're going to have, or they're going to open completely remote?
Yes. Most of the high schools on the North Shore are opening fully
remote. Yeah, I'm not surprised at the high schools, but even the elementary schools are going to open up, or will it'll be a combination?
A couple schools have been full in and a couple have been hybrid.
Yeah. It's going to become quite the cluster, if you ask me. Look, I think, again, if a teacher is teaching remotely, it doesn't matter where they're teaching from. They should be allowed to teach remotely from their home if they're more comfortable, as long as they can be effective. That has to be. So
that's my next question is, how do you know that they're being effective?
Well, you monitor instruction, for example, and this is what other school districts have done. The principals, the administrators, the instructional coordinators, they need to be able to tune in on those classrooms and observe instruction, just like they would walk into a classroom and observe live instruction on site. So they need to be monitoring that. They're not going to sit around while everybody's teaching remotely. They need to be actually tuning in on every classroom and monitoring the instruction that's going on. They also need to be surveying the parents. This is the age of social media. They should constantly set up a mechanism so teachers can provide continuous feedback so that people can make adjustment. They're concerned about their child, they're not getting it. The child has social emotional problems, because it's just not, the challenge is just not providing core instruction. What about special needs kids, special education kids? If you think it's tough to teach remotely to high school kids, or even tougher to teach to primary grade kids, imagine if children have special needs. Parents can
that is our situation here, is they're not bringing the special needs kids even into school.
That's right. So that's a dangerous thing because, there are some, like there are some entities out there, like there's this company called teleteachers, and these are all special education teachers who teach remotely. So, but there aren't the same type of really high quality private providers out there. Teleteachers is a high quality one. There may be others out there in the special education world as they are in the non-special education world. That's why I'm saying people's tasks have to be adjusted. Look, in the remote learning environment, the actual instructional day of teachers interacting with the kids is going to be limited. Even if it's a quality program, it's not going to be, you're not going to get 6-7 hours of live instruction a day. It's not going to happen. So, but if that's diminished, it means there may be teachers who can take on additional responsibilities. They can become the tutors, or you can cannibalize vacancies and fill those vacancies with an army of tutors, retired teachers who can come in and provide more one-on-one interaction with the students. Not one-on-one every day, but you might have a tutor that maybe works with 5 different families during the course of the week. You see what I mean? So you're going to have to create that infrastructure, but that's where you're going to have to get flexibility. That's where the teachers union are going to have to make accommodations, because if you're going to go remotely and you're going to stay remotely, you really have to ensure that your core courses are synchronous, and that you have that live instruction, and that you're putting the instructional time in. But then you're going to have to make sure that you've got the instructional support, so that if students are behind, they can get that additional supplemental instructional assistance, whether it's through a tutor or what have you, so you can help get them back on track. So any remote learning system has got to provide the core instruction. It's got to have that instructional support in the form of tutors, et cetera, particularly for children who have special needs, are going to need more individualized attention. And, you need to be open. You need to be open to perhaps outsourcing some of the program offerings to companies or entities out there that can deliver it in a quality way, even if it's universities that can serve you in a quality. And for those kids who do not have special needs, just to keep them occupied and engaged, and to place them in healthy environments, the work-study component, particularly for juniors and seniors, is an ideal component. You should Google Crystal Ray. Crystal Ray is a Jesuit school that started in Chicago. That school is almost overwhelmingly minority, overwhelmingly poverty, and those kids go to school and then they work. So they go to school and they work, and the money that they get from working helps pay their tuition. But they have 95% graduation rates. The overwhelming vast majority of kids go on to college. It's a really constructive environment. There are now 32 Crystal Ray schools across the country. So that's a good model. That's a good model for these high schools, so that you can give the students a complete school day. Maybe 4 hours is spent on core instruction, and then maybe 2-3 hours in the afternoon or in the morning. Maybe you have shifts, particularly if you reopen schools half day, and then you have the schools at half the population. Kids go to school in the morning, then they're in a work study in the afternoon, or they go to work study in the morning, and then they are in class, they're in the classroom in the afternoon. There's various things that you can do if your teachers union is willing to make the accommodation and enable you to make those adjustments.
Okay. So what I'm really hearing from you, we only have a couple minutes left. So
Sure.
What I'm really hearing from you is that we have to really take a new, fresh approach to how education looks in this country.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And all bets are off right now. I mean, it means
yeah.
people have to be willing to take on additional responsibilities. The normal class schedules, the normal staffing models are all out the window. And so people have got to be willing to make adjustments, to take on new roles. And every teacher needs to master the capacity to provide remote instruction. If things ever get back to normal, and we're probably facing the new normal, then in the new normal, there should not be a course that you offer that you can't deliver remotely. And there should not be a teacher that you hire that cannot deliver that instruction remotely. I mean, period. So you should literally create 2 simultaneous systems that mirror each other. And there's no reason why that can't be done. And obviously that's a long-term design, because if you do that, then you're prepared for the next pandemic. And if you do that, you'll be able to provide continuity of instruction in the normal, the normal times when there'll be no more snow days, there'll be no more sick days or anything like that. And also, if you have that remote learning platform, you can enhance instructional offerings. You can offer more core courses. You can extend the learning day for students that are struggling. You can give students opportunities you can have like reteach hours and things like that, so that students aren't falling further and further behind, you see? So that's what schools have got to do. They've got to start building a remote system that's just not going to help them deal with instruction during the pandemic, but a permanent infrastructure, so they'll never be caught with their proverbial pants down again, and that they'll have a system that can ensure continuity of instruction if schools are ever shut down again, either short-term or long-term.
So, just as far as what parents really can do. So besides going to the school board and voting them out.
Yeah.
Which is easy, right? Whatever.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to declare war on your board.
No. I mean, because that's a big thing. I'm talking about like day to day. How can parents interact with the school board and interact with the teachers and interact with the superintendents? From your perspective, we don't know. So we send emails. Does that work? I don't know. We make calls. Does that work? Like what can you give us to say, okay, do this and it will get heard, at least get heard?
Well, sometimes it's like protecting from making schools a healthy environment in the COVID world is a combination of things. It's like they never found an AIDS vaccine. They developed a cocktail, a multiplicity of drugs that helped stem or control the virus and things like that. You know what I mean? And so when it comes to COVID, when it comes to making schools safe, there may be a combination of things. There may be a combination of things that you have to do. It's the same thing when it comes to your local school councils and things like that, or your local school boards. What you've got to do is you've got to create a multiple, you've got to do multiple things. So showing up at board meetings, really being active, creating like your own PAC so that you can support candidates that believe in year-round school, that believe in work study, that believe that in doing everything you can to keep schools open in a safe way, that believe that you should have the flexibility. I'm not talking about compensation, the flexibility to make adjustments in people's work responsibilities as events dictate. I mean, that's a part of getting organized. Setting up a blog, conversing on social media, so you can be observing and you could be constantly commenting. So it's out there. So people, that's another way that you can mobilize the community. Giving the, holding your own webinars, inviting other experts to come in. That's how you empower yourself. Social media is a very powerful tool. There's no reason why the parents, if united, and that doesn't mean that everyone's going to have a like opinion, but at least you set what your primary goals are. You want schools that are that have the health safety infrastructure in place, so that the students and faculty are healthy and in secure environments. And you want a remote learning program that is constantly getting better and better and better. And you set certain objectives, and then you monitor it, and then you comment on it. So I think it's a combination of things. I think it's showing up at the board, getting organized during elections, making informed recommendations based on research and the fact, and constantly, like you're doing right now, communicating among your parents, really getting organized, really becoming a force, and not allowing yourself to get co-opted like a lot of groups are. I mean, the unions weren't fools. A number of years ago, they realized that they're on the ropes. They're on the ropes because there was a big push to improve and expand school choices and things like that. So they decided that they were going to co-opt the progressive groups, which is what they did. They began to become some of the biggest contributors to progressive organizations, so that they could, envelope themselves in this cloak of they're part of the progressive movement. You know what I mean? I mean, the Chicago Teachers Union argued for a lot of things that they said were going to improve student conditions in the schools. 90% of that $1.5 billion contract is really compensation and benefits. So at the end of the day, you can't allow yourself to be divided. And I'm not trying to portray them as the enemy. I'm just saying it's politics. They're formidable. They're going to be looking for allies, But if you say you're a progressive and you want to shut down charter schools, or you don't want inner city kids to have educational choices, then really, how progressive are you when you really think about it? So the unions have an agenda. What you need to do is you need to become a force, and you need to kind of insulate yourself. So you're really an independent voice, and you're going to support the union leadership when they're right, and you're not going to support them when they're supporting things. I mean, everything that is done from the budget to the collective bargaining agreement has got to be done in a way that improves academic performance. The reason I've been successful, and some people will say I haven't, you know what I mean? I'll let for me, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly when you blog. That's what happens when you're in controversial situations. But I've always said that collective bargaining agreements have to be school improvement agreements. And I'm comfortable to say that I've had success in negotiating those type of agreements because I brought the union in as a full partner. But it also needs to be the same with budget. There are fundamental things that exist in all high-performing schools. And your budgets and your collective bargaining agreements have to be built around to supporting those things. And all too often, they're not. All too often, the budgets are, how are we going to balance the budget for this year without any thought of the long-term implications? Or a lot of times is, how are we going to negotiate another collective bargaining agreement to get schools open without examining whether or not that agreement gives the school more flexibility or ensures that there's more accountability or gives the teachers additional tasks and raises expectations along with the increase in compensation. So everything you do, every decision that is made has to be made with an eye towards how is this going to improve student achievement and how is this going to ensure that children are safe and secure. And I think if that guides you, not that you're not going to have any missteps, and you try to inform yourselves, you try to be informed by the facts, by the evidence. In the case of COVID, the science, I think you'll be more right than wrong.
Okay. Well, we have spent a full hour and you've been fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And thanks for just throwing your knowledge out there.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I love to get any feedback from your listeners, good or bad. I welcome it because I'm not too old to kind of reassess or self-assess. Do look at my LinkedIn page, Paul Vallas. Also, I have a public Facebook page. It's also Paul Vallas. So a lot of times I actually post a lot of this stuff or I'll establish links. So we're posting stuff all the time. And I'm going to be putting, inspired by you in part, by what parents should demand or what parents should ask for. So I'm going to articulate this on my next contribution to LinkedIn. And anytime anyone has a problem or a question or an issue, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be more than happy to be responsive. It was a privilege for me to talk to you and your friends.
Thank you.
Good luck and good health.
Thank you. And we've got this streaming on our live Facebook page, so anybody can put comments. Well, this is our internal reopen.
I think that's great. That's great.
So anybody can put any comments in there and you'll see those too. So thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
I'm so appreciative.
My pleasure.
Take care.
Bye-bye.